The Boar River, when you read the books of Jim Corbett,
Yeah,
the thousands of times it have mentioned the Boar River.
yeah.
This is the Boar River.
Okay.
And this bridge is built by the British time in 1899.
Right.
It's still working very well.
Very good.
How strong work have been done by the British time. Seriously, I'm telling you. Yes.
Our guide joins us.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
He is the Inder big beast. He's from local this area. He's my friend. He's a guide
Thank you.
of this area.
Okay. And what's his name? What's your name?
Inder Singh Beast. INDRA. Indra Singh Beast.
Inder Singh Beast.
Yeah.
Beast. Beast.
First plan to show you the canal.
Okay.
क्या बोलते हैं बात point?
Maggie Corbett.
Maggie Corbett.
Corbett's sister.
Yeah.
Maggie Corbett.
After visiting Corbett's Nainital, I'm really excited by this. With Indra, our guide, and Raymond, our interpreter, a great team, showing us around the places mentioned so often in Corbett's books. Where did Jim watch over his sister's bathing? We'll discover all of this during this tour.
And मैं पीछे जो है जो जिम कॉर्बेट क्रिस्टोफर जिम विलियम कॉर्बेट थे जिम कॉर्बेट के फादर तो वो उनका घर था
अब वो बता दो अभी चलो वो बताइए ओके कब
उसी को देखने हम जा रहे हैं.
So where are we? Well, we're looking at India again, right up in the north here, and we've got Delhi on the left and Uttarakhand over here. So going in a bit closer, Corbett National Park on the left, Ramnagar. Our previous trip started at Ramnagar and we came down here to Kaladhungi, and we then went up to Nainital, which is up here. And that was Jim Corbett's summer home. And in the winter, he stayed at Kaladhungi, and this is where we're exploring now. So let's just go in closer. Google shows this outline here, and that's Kaladhungi Nagar Panchayat, which is town council. And the area we're interested in is just slightly to the northwest up here. And let's just go in closer. We'll talk about the museum later, but this is where we're really interested. And we've parked our vehicle here. And what we'll do is walk along here, and we'll come to a number of dry riverbeds, or monsoon rivers as they're referred to. This is the first one, and I'm just going to pull back a bit on that, because what I want to do is show you the farmyard. Corbett talked about a triangular bit of land as a farmyard, and I suspect it's this bit of land up here. Which triangle it is, I don't know, but we'll come to a number of these rivers as we walk along. And I'm just going to zoom back in again, and we'll walk along here, and Maggie's, or the girl's bathing point is somewhere along here, and this is where Corbett would have kept guard. But his house was along here, and we'll see that, Arundel. It's interesting to see, it's Corbett Farmyard Safari Lodge. That's interesting, I've only just seen that. It sounds as though you could actually stay there. You'll see it's in very good condition, it looks beautifully maintained, and I'm sure Corbett would be very proud of that, and Maggie and all the Corbetts. So we then walk along here, and we'll come to the bottom down here, which is the iron foundry, and it's North India's first iron foundry. I found that absolutely fascinating. Let's get started. The canal was built in 1860, 173 years ago, and was known as Ramsay's Canal, after the far-sighted district commissioner for Kumaon, who was here between 1840 and 1868. He had it constructed. Ramsay was one of the great soldier administrators of British India, who enjoyed the respect and the support of local people. So the canal goes over a little stream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monsoon river.
Mountain river, yeah. Yeah.
Property of the Jim Corbett's father, Christopher Corbett.
Okay.
So he sold when he went from here.
Yeah.
So he was used to live here, his father.
Okay. So they lived here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It was Ramsay, the district commissioner, who suggested to Jim's father that he should seek a second home away from Nainital winters down on the plains of Kaladhungi, just outside the small village of Choti Haldwani. This is it. It was 10 acres in size. They called it Arundel and put most of the acreage down to mangoes and soft fruit. It was to play a very significant part in Jim's young formative life. The summers were spent in Nainital and the winters here at Kaladhungi. This is the farmyard. Look, who's all come to greet us?
जिम कॉर्बेट ने ही सबसे पहले लेपर्ड को साइड मतलब लेपर्ड का इधर ही उनने जो है किल किया था मतलब वो हंटिंग
He hunted the first leopard in this area.
Okay.
जिम कॉर्बेट का फार्म यार्ड था ना, वो पीछे एक घर था इनका और ये इनका फार्म यार्ड था, तो जिम कॉर्बेट ज़्यादातर जंगलों में यहीं आते थे बचपन से ही.
The farmyard is where Jim learnt about the jungle and its wildlife. From a very young age, Jim was close to local Indians. He would have seen them as equals, albeit from different cultures with separate traditions. His jungle guru was Kunwar Singh, who was headman of a nearby village, who also hunted. Jim's childhood was spent learning the ways of the jungle, and he was able to mimic birds, monkeys, even tigers, and being able to call tigers to him. He often wandered alone in the jungle. Kunwar was to guide him throughout his growing years. He learnt how to stalk, which became absolutely invaluable to him when he had to go and hunt man-eaters.
Called the Maggie Bath Point.
Oh.
Down the steps. Yeah, in the steps.
There were 15 children from the European community living in Kaladhungi in the 1880s. As the youngest, Jim's daily task, as instructed by his mother, was to accompany the 7 girls to the canal and act as lookout while they swam, bathed and played in the canal. We have to remember it was the 19th century when girls were expected to wear night dresses when swimming. His primary task was to warn of approaching males so the girls could be decent, whether they be woodcutters, pilgrims or locals heading to the bazaar in Kaladhungi. It was a task that he didn't enjoy and wished he was playing with the other boys.
He was a young boy and was standing like here. Seriously. And both sides he was just keep looking.
Yeah. That was his job.
His job was with that, yes.
As a little boy, he was left there,
Yes.
and he was to shout if anyone was coming. Didn't matter whether it was his brothers or villagers.
Yeah, whoever coming
Had to
in.
give them a warning. So we're off to the Foundry.
Water coming off it until now.
You're right.
Irrigation, first time I've seen the water coming off
Yes,
the canal.
With the water.
Going for the irrigation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've blocked it now, yeah.
रहमान भाई ये पॉइंट इसलिए बनाया है, इधर तो पानी आ रहा है तो जितने भी यहाँ के जंगली जानवर ना पानी पीने यहाँ आते हैं, ये हमेशा पानी रहता है.
What's the idea actually they had their mind at that time? You know what's the reason of this water coming this side? Because the wild animal cannot drink water from the canal. It's tough for them.
Yeah.
This is a built by that time by Jim Corbett. Idea was there because the wild animal when come they can drink from in this area.
Okay.
So it's still water and throughout the year water available in this area
For the animals.
for the animals.
Fantastic. Look who's up the tree. Jungle babbler.
Jungle babblers.
Yeah, Corbett talked a lot about the jungle babblers. I got wondering as to why Ramsay should build an irrigation canal here. Well, I did a bit of digging on Google to try and understand the wider context for the construction of canals in British India. From what I can discover, the construction of irrigation canals was in response to monsoons failing in 1837-38, when it is said that over 80,000 people died in northwest India.
It's underground from here because the monsoon river coming from there.
Okay.
So it's underground from here and then up here over there.
Oh, right. Because of the road?
Because of monsoon river. That's a monsoon creek thing.
So this stream crosses over the top of the canal, and hence the canal going underneath. And where Dave's standing back there is the canal, and the stream carries on, and the Ramsay's Canal appears the other side here. Good to see the maintenance continue. One of the big dangers I'm fully aware of when we look at the back to the past is we forget the context of everything. And we just talked about the famine of 1837 to 1838, and I wondered how much of India today was controlled by the British. And this is the map I found, 1837, and this is 1857. British territory shown in pink, Hindu in yellow, and Mohammedan in green. And I'm very colourblind, but you can see the British didn't control the whole of India at that time. So when we look at this and we talk about India having a famine, we need to realise that there were different authorities there, and it wasn't as simple as the British controlling the whole of India. Even the Mughals didn't control the whole of India, and they were the people ruling India before the British, and they weren't Indian. They were Muslim that come from Central Asia. So just to put it into context, it's just worth looking at that when we discuss these things. Right, nice to go. Look, there's another one.
Oh wow.
Big ones, isn't it? Big one.
Yeah, big ones. Somebody washing.
It's when you got the steps down in different places.
Continuing talking about Ramsay's Canal, it was part of the British irrigation canal system, which was implemented after the famine of 1837-38. By 1892, the British had constructed over 43,000 miles of irrigation canals in India, irrigating 13 million acres. Another 50 years, by the 1940s, the canal system served 59 million acres, or 24 million hectares, roughly a quarter of India's total crop area. Hello, morning, namaste. When we look at Ramsay's Kaladhungi Canal, it was put in as a means of irrigation to try and prevent further famines.
North India's first iron foundry,
Okay.
built by
Mr. Davis.
Ramsay, 1878.
Banned tree felling in this area. Very progressive.
Foundry.
Wow. Where was it here?
Yeah.
Okay. And the canal goes on.
Is there something to see?
India's first iron foundry got me thinking, surely that isn't right. I know India has a very long history of smelting iron. Indeed, India was far more advanced and ahead of the English when they arrived here in the 1600s to trade. The critical words are North India's first iron foundry.
This is the stone of the iron stone. Hold it. How?
Yeah.
Normal stone नहीं ऐसा इतना हल्का है वो iron
This is
ore है.
normal stone. That's the iron stone.
That's like a little wild pig, this one.
It's a rock of the iron stone.
Okay. It's interesting to discover the town's name originates from this foundry and the stone here. Kaladhungi means black, dunga or stone in the local dialect. Black refers to the iron content of the stone found here. The notice tells us it was built in 1858 and didn't close until 1878. The Corbetts arrived here in the 1860s. By these dates, the foundry must have been very much in operation. Oh, wow.
They bring from the forest, and it's still there because they didn't melt for the iron after that, because it's banned by the government of British that time.
So they used it as a wall.
It's used as a wall right now.
उधर वाली wall भी दिख रही है पूरी
That wall also made by that iron stone.
यहाँ
So that was iron stone. Iron.
Foundry.
Yeah, our foundry. Yes. The foundry is the other side. Yeah.
Behind, okay.
Piche. So okay, let's see that iron foundry.
Okay. Jim, his mother's 12th child, was born in July 1875. The notice board tells us the foundry closed 3 years later in 1878, when Sir Henry Ramsay, the British soldier administrator for Kumaon, banned the felling of trees, which were being used to fuel the foundry. Martin Booth's book about Jim Corbett tells us the other families from the European community here were the Nestors and the Morrisons, who may have been involved with the foundry. I have always painted the picture of the foundry being a pile of stones, a tumbled ruin, now dread. Well, we discovered it was very far from being a tumbled ruin, a lot of it very much intact. It was a great surprise to me. Yeah.
What is it? Iron? Is
Iron waste.
yeah.
Canal would have run along the top here.
Yes.
Then David's saying maybe a water wheel. I think that tells us that the canal was built for the iron foundry and irrigation of the land.
It's iron,
Yeah.
and from there that going to the canal.
Water. Okay.
And in the end, there's a road very close by,
Okay.
and they're collecting iron from that.
Okay. So they transported the iron from the road.
Yes, from there.
Okay.
हाँ ये 4 स्ट्रक्चर हैं
This 4 structure of the canal for the
Iron
iron,
foundry.
for our iron foundry.
Goodness me.
Mild iron in this.
I'm impressed with how intact it is. I didn't know it was still here.
लेकिन उन्हीं को उनने देखा कि यार ये तो बहुत उल्टा काम हो गया हमसे तो जंगल कटते जाएगा पूरा तो उन्होंने बंद करवाया फिर फटाफट काम
The beginning of that iron foundry by the Henry Ramsay, and also by the Henry Ramsay.
Okay.
because He thought one day
Causing too much
the forest,
destruction.
Yes, the forest will be too much.
So he started the foundry, did
Yeah, he started the
And then
foundry.
realised it was
He
a
realized
problem.
that, and they
Yeah.
stopped that.
तो ये सारा रेलवे के लिए यहाँ से लोहा जाता
It was a use that iron used for the railway track.
Oh, for the railways. Okay. Okay. We'll follow you. That makes sense. The British built over 16,000 miles of railway in India from 1853. The foundry was started 5 years later, 1858. There must have been a big demand for steel at that time. That's where we've just walked along. Here's the foundries. And I'm just going to stand back a bit more to try and take them in there. 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm so impressed. I never realised these were here.
इसके नीचे आग लगा देते ऊपर से पत्थर भर दिया नहीं वहाँ से पानी आएगा सीधे वो ठंडा करते थे आग से कलेक्ट कर रेलवे
You okay? Stand up.
Wow. That's the centre.
The chute for it.
And they pull it down. I presume they put the iron ore and the wood in at the top,
Yeah, stack it, don't they?
stack it and burn it from the bottom,
Yeah.
and it all comes down.
And looks like a chute, but why would they have a chute?
To take out the
Take
waste
Is it the waste, or is it would it
ash and the byproduct of the molten stone.
or would they draw the molten stone out that way? Once
So now we're heading back, having seen the iron foundry. So we pay 10 rupees for each person who visits the iron foundry, and it goes towards the landowner who owns the land and his family. We're impressed by his compost, the new compost for his crop. Where does the canal go? Where does it finish?
It's finished. It's canal. The water is going to the villages. 20 villages are getting benefit from.
For their irrigation.
It's like irrigation. It's from one place it's going to the village, and from one place to the different village.
Okay.
That's in 20 village.
And they share the water.
They share the water.
Yeah.
By the number.
Yeah.
So, but at the end, does it empty into a pond?
As we head back to our transport for the second part of the guided tour, I want to just sum up my feelings. Firstly, this was so special. Special as it would appear the area has not changed, and certainly not changed significantly. The canal is fully functioning and obviously cared for. The farmyard jungle, which Jim enjoyed so much, is still there. Apparently unaltered and unmolested by us humans. Possibly great credit should be given to the Corbett heritage community, who our excellent guide Indra comes from. I'll talk more about that later in the tour. Arundel, the Corbett's family home, is in pristine condition and much loved, just as we saw Gurney, his home in Nainital. I know that would make him and his sister Maggie so pleased. What about the iron foundry? That was a big surprise to me. Indra's excellent explanation added so much to our visit. Then learning that the foundry was closed to protect the forests. Yes, that was in 1878, nearly 150 years ago. Sadly, mankind continues to destroy forests across the world, but not here. I absolutely love that. Now off to learn about Choti Haldwani and Jim's home he built there. What we're then going to go to, the museum that exists today, and we're going to drive here and have a look at that and his model village. And I think if I pull that back, the word Choti Haldwani comes up, and that's the village that Jim bought. And his parents lived at Arundel, and when Jim built himself a house, which is now a museum, and that is in his model village of Choti Haldwani, and we'll talk more about that next. As you've just seen, Jim's family home at Kaladhungi was at Arundel, just beside Ramsay's Canal. In 1915, when Jim was 40 years of age, he bought the near derelict village of Choti Haldwani at Kaladhungi. Why do I say it was nearly derelict? Well, Kaladhungi had been a busy location, as it was at the junction of where the roads from the plains and those of the hill station to Nainital met. But with the railway arriving at Haldwani in 1884, 13 miles away, the importance of Kaladhungi diminished and the population moved. So by 1918, when he purchased the village, many of the houses were unoccupied or in ruins. Jim set about getting the fields back into production, and as soon as people heard that he was doing this, they arrived from the forests and the plains to take up residency.
Living here.
Okay. This is Jim's winter home, which he built for himself in Choti Haldwani, the village which he purchased. The single-storey bungalow with its deep veranda consists of the main house and a smaller building to the side. This is said to have been Jim's bedroom, although it is said he often slept in a tent in the garden. His sister Maggie joined him in later years, running the household and making sure her own almond marzipan made from the trees in the garden and cheese loaf, for which he is much admired, were made here. Here the villagers came for medication when they were ill, the medication being dispensed from a chest stocked with common medicines of the day, such as quinine tablets, potassium permanganate, splints and bandages. The kitchen was a small separate building to the rear. It was so important to separate the two buildings on account of fire. The kitchen would have used wood for the stoves and also the household heating for the hot water. My own family's house in Kenya was burnt down because my grandfather had built the kitchen too close to the house. A fire in the kitchen ended up burning down the whole house. Not so here for Jim's good design. At Christmas, Jim and Maggie would organise games for the children of Choti Haldwani and give toys and sweets. On occasions, Jim would organise a children's day in the farmyard, where the older boys would be taught to track and learn about animals and birds and know their surroundings. Today, Jim's house is part of the community-based tourism initiative run by the Jim Corbett Heritage Choti Haldwani. It provides an additional source of income to the local community so as to make a life away from the forest-based livelihood. In addition, the funds go to eco-management and preserving the forests and surroundings. Inside Jim and Maggie's house, you can see and learn all about Jim's life. The community also actively engage in activities that would make Jim so proud to see. Conservation of flora and fauna in the area. They organise and run awareness campaigns, nature workshops for maintaining biodiversity of the area. There's a 3.5 kilometre or 2 mile Jim Corbett Heritage Trail through Choti Haldwani, which takes about 2 hours. This has to be on my next visit to-do list. You can also stay in Choti Haldwani and experience the rural life and interact with the villagers. That too will be on my next visit to-do list. There are some 350 bird species in and around Choti Haldwani to enjoy. Can you see the souvenir shop? Yeah? And of course there is the souvenir shop with local handicrafts and Jim's books and agricultural products. If you want to know more, go to the website corbettvillage.in and make sure your next visit to Corbett National Park takes in this wonderful initiative that Jim would be so proud of.
Jim Corbett's two dogs.
2 dogs, yeah.
Robin and Rosina.
Robin and Rosina, okay. Buried here.
Areas, total areas, 221 acres.
221 acres. Wow, it's quite big.
Yeah.
Before we board our coach for a quick look at the 221 acres that makes up the greater part of Choti Haldwani, it would be remiss of me not to talk about what the world got to know Jim Corbett for in the early and mid-20th century. They knew him for his prowess of hunting down the man-eaters that killed so many in his beloved Kumaon. It all started in 1907 when he was 32 years old. He returned home on leave when the Deputy Commissioner for Kumaon asked Jim if he would try and eliminate a tiger that was killing someone every 3 days. It must have been absolutely terrifying living in the area. Just stop and imagine living where you do now and hearing every 3 days or so that someone had been taken by this man-eater. She had started life in neighbouring Nepal, taking over 200 lives there before she was driven into Kumaon. By 1907, she had had another 200 victims, and numbers continued to increase weekly. As with all man-eaters across India at that time, a reward was offered by the government. This had failed after numerous sportsmen, army officers and locals had had their attempts. Jim's knowledge of tigers and wildlife was well known locally. Jim agreed to make an attempt on 2 conditions, which he set out for all subsequent attempts at man-eaters. The first was the removal of the reward, and the second, no one else was allowed to hunt at the same time, and this was really a self-preservation order. He didn't want to be a victim of a fellow hunter. His success at hunting man-eaters became known locally and then across India via the media. Jim explains how he started writing. He says, "At dinner at Government House in Nainital one night, a lady sitting next to me, who had recently come from the outlying district of Kumaon, asked me to fill in some blanks in the stories she'd heard from local inhabitants about one of my hunting experiences. After dinner, my hostess, Lady Val Haig, the wife of the province's governor, informed me she'd overheard part of the conversation, if I had committed any of my jungle experiences to paper. When I pleaded not guilty, she surprised me by asking if it had ever occurred to me how intensely selfish it was of me not having done so. Before I said good night, she had extracted a promise that I'd write up some of my jungle experiences so that others, beside those who sat next to me at a table, could enjoy them too." Well, the rest is history, as they say. His ability to transport the reader to the jungles of India are gripping. I have read his books many, many times and never tire of them. To his beloved inhabitants of Kumaon, he was a very special Shikari or hunter. For the local people, these man-eaters harboured the devil within them. For this, Jim became regarded as a sadhu, a sort of holy man, who could perform miracles where mere mortals had failed. Now we're off to get a glimpse of Choti Haldwani. Over the 30 or so years that Jim owned the village, he arranged for the traditional houses and stone courtyards to be repaired. He constructed a concrete watercourse system to supply water to all the homes. He encouraged the villagers to grow new disease-resistant varieties of crops. As you can imagine, crops attracted wild animals, pigs and porcupines, who would come in at night. Jim helped to guard the produce too, eventually paying for a wall to be built to protect the village.
Okay, this looks like the
It's a very old temple here.
Okay.
And this is a model village. This is the land which the Jim Corbett donated to the villagers here.
So all of this is the wall.
This is the wall.
Okay.
He took it upon himself to support the underdog and everything that was to do with his beloved Kumaon. He loved India and his fellow Indians with a passion during the whole of his life. In both the world wars he volunteered to support the cause, as had so many of his fellow Indians. By 1940, when he was 65 years old, he was no longer capable of active service.
Land by the Jim Corbett.
Jim Corbett gave it.
Jim Corbett land.
Gave it to the villagers.
They gave it to the villagers, donate.
Okay.
40-hectare area, 1 hectare for each family.
Wow.
He was appointed a senior instructor in jungle warfare. My own father, then in the Indian Army, and many British personnel completed training with Jim Corbett. After the Second World War, the decision to divide India into Pakistan and India caused imaginable turmoil. My own father told me how he, with his Sikh regiment, witnessed a train driving into a station, and the only person alive on the train was the driver. So Maggie and Jim were faced with a terrible decision. What to do? They saw themselves first and foremost as Indians, albeit Indians with British heritage. They saw India as their country, their home. It was where they had lived all their lives. Over the next 20 years or so, many families with British ancestry across the British Empire who had grown up for several generations in the country and who had also seen it as their home were faced with a similar impossible decision. They had been abandoned by the British politicians who had failed to negotiate a role for them in the new independent countries. As for Jim and Maggie, some years later, Maggie was to write. After independence came in India and our British friends were leaving, we began to realize that it would be very difficult for us to remain, especially when the time came for one of us to be taken, the contemplation of the other having to live all alone in Gurney House, our home for nearly all the years of our lives, and so full of memories, could not be faced. We therefore decided very reluctantly to leave. Our choice of destination fell on Kenya, the reason being that Jim knew the country, and we felt the conditions of life there would be much like those that we'd used to in India. 9 days later they left. Maggie wrote, "The morning we were due to leave, we looked across the waters of the lake, which was describably beautiful in the early morning light. Our servants did not make our departure any easier, as they stood with tears trickling down their cheeks as we moved down the hill from the house we knew we should never see again." Jim didn't disclose his departure date to the villagers of Choti Haldwani, as he knew the pain of leaving them would be too hard to bear. They were accompanied by Jim's last bearer, Ramsay, standing in the crowds on the station platform, tears rolling down his cheeks. Kenya wasn't India. Maggie especially found it hard to settle. 7 years later, in April 1955, Jim suffered a fatal heart attack. He was buried in Nyeri under Mount Kenya. His last words to Maggie were, "Always be brave and try to make the world as happy a place for others to live in."